This time on Poll Hub, is Donald Trump a demagogue? Is he a genius? Turns out there's an argument he's both. We'll talk about this with the author of The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump. Then, sports betting has quickly become a massive business since it began becoming legal in states across the nation. Is that a good thing, or will it destroy pro sports? Or maybe is there someplace in the middle? Finally, if you think you've heard this before, maybe you have. Déjà vu is our fun fact, so stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffiths.
And I'm Thomas Rogers.
There has been a lot of ink spilled and digital ink spilled and a lot of talk about President Trump and what he represents as a change from other presidents in the past. And one of the things that has come up a lot is the performance aspect of him as president, as opposed to the political or the policy parts of him as being a president. A lot of words have been thrown around. Fascist is one that, has gotten a lot of people upset. But another one is demagogue. And it's interesting to think about how demagoguery is defined and whether that applies to this president or whether he is simply using rhetoric and politics in a way that is not unheard of in American politics. It's been a long time since we've seen it done this way. So we thought, so that we didn't just talk about this in circles, maybe we'd bring in somebody who actually knows something about this. And that is Dr. Jennifer Murcia from Texas A&M. She has written several books, but the one we're interested in is called The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump. Dr. Murcia, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So is Donald Trump a rhetorical genius?
He is. Nobody likes to hear that, but yes, he is.
And how so? I mean, in looking at him and looking at the way that he has communicated as a politician, how is he a genius and how is he different than at least modern presidential politicians that we've seen in our lifetimes?
That's such a great question. We really can talk about this for several hours. So first of all, the rhetorical genius part of the title of that book, it is a callback to a literary scholar named Kenneth Burke, who wrote a book review of Mein Kampf when it came out in 1938, 1939 in English. And in that book review, he explained what he called Hitler's demagogic effectiveness, right? And so it's not that he is a beautiful speaker or a logical speaker, that he leads his audience to reason well through, difficult claims and invokes, sort of values in a good and positive way, but that he's very effective at being a demagogue. And so that's the reference in the title. I thought rhetorical genius, especially with the way that he calls himself a genius so often, made more sense to the modern ear. But it's the same kind of thing, right? Which isn't to say that Trump is Hitler, but it is to say that like Hitler and Mussolini, who were both very sophisticated propagandists, Donald Trump knows how to work the media system in a way that other people of his era have not been able to do.
So what is the difference between describing a president or a political leader as a demagogue and just describing them as a great communicator?
It's another great question. So a demagogue literally translates to a leader of the people. So it's a neutral word. We don't actually think of it in a neutral way, of course. And so when I go back to ancient Greece and I go back to Athens specifically, where the word emerges, demagogue is someone who is an unaccountable leader, right? But when you look it up in the OED or other dictionaries, you find two contradictory definitions. One says that the demagogue is someone who defends the interests of the people against the other parts of the state, which are viewed as corrupt. And then there's the sort of negative version that says it's someone who uses polarizing propaganda for their own gain, right, against the rest of the state. And so those two contradictory definitions, I think, are very informative for understanding Donald Trump and his effectiveness, his rhetorical genius, because he is absolutely seen as a heroic demagogue by his followers. And y'all know the data better than I do, but something like 38% of the American public is highly committed and enthusiastic supporters of this president. Thank you for the confirmation.
So thanks for reading our poll data. No, thank you.
And that's not likely to change for reasons, right? So political psychologists and people who study political psychology in general have learned a lot about right-wing authoritarian personalities. And what they know is that there's about that number of people who have what can be classified as a right-wing authoritarian personality. And that's actually a good thing in a political community, because if everybody was super liberal and, not a rule follower, then we would have chaos. But so right-wing authoritarian personalities are characterized by being very defensive of group norms, looking for a strong leader who will tell them what to do and simplify things. They're very motivated by us versus them messaging, right? They like things to be simplified for them. And so they are very willing to say, let's give all of our trust and all of the authority to this person who promises to solve all the problems. So Donald Trump has very wisely, I guess, but also diabolically, used strategies that will bring his base close to him so that he is their hero, and at the same time polarize everyone else away from him. So everyone who's not in that 38% or whatever, 37%, they see him as a dangerous demagogue, as someone who's using propaganda and rhetoric in a dangerous and bad way as a weapon to attack the political community.
So I do find it interesting is if we are looking at political rhetoric, and we do tend to define demagogue, and you have the comparisons you've made to Trump were Hitler and Mussolini. I mean, I think perhaps some of his followers might equate him closer to a Ronald Reagan or an FDR. So is that perception, or is there some science behind those different perceptions?
Yeah. So I think there's some comparisons that you can make in terms of how FDR and how Ronald Reagan both took advantage of the media environment that they were in a very successful way. And I think that is a legitimate and fair comparison that can be made and that is accurate. So FDR, as you all know, was very successful at putting himself inside every American's home, right? He was the first president to use radio. At the same time, Mussolini and Hitler were also using radio in a similar way. Okay, but anyway, to use radio to connect as a president and as a person with the public. So his fireside chats really enabled him to become a member of the family. It was very intimate, the way that he communicated. And so, he was able to achieve big policy changes, redo the structure of government, largely because he had the support and trust of the American public. Ronald Reagan was very good, of course, a trained actor like Donald Trump, very good at communicating through television. In your opening, you said that one of the things that's noteworthy about Donald Trump is the way that we talk about his image all the time. Well, the job of the president actually is two jobs. One is to do the actual work of running the country, which is, being in the meetings, reading the reports, making the hard choices. The American public has no access to any of that, and we cannot have any access to that. And so since about the time of Teddy Roosevelt, sometimes scholars argue really it was Woodrow Wilson, who started what's known as the rhetorical presidency, which is using rhetoric and communication strategies to communicate directly with the public. Since that time, the president has had a second job, which is to play the role of the president on America's radio and all other forms of media, right? And so Donald Trump excels at that in the same way that Ronald Reagan excelled at that. Ronald Reagan was very good at playing the role of the president on America's televisions. Donald Trump is very good at, he calls it modern day presidential, right? So very different from what Reagan did, but he is very good at using outrage strategies, engagement bait, memes, right? All of these strategies that win the day on social media, Donald Trump is very good at using those strategies. And in so doing, he is able to connect with the public, with his public, in a similar way to Reagan and FDR. The main difference is in the polarization. FDR and Reagan were not trying to polarize the nation. That wasn't their strategy. They were trying to unite the nation. So when presidential rhetoric and other kinds of presidency scholars, historians, and political scientists talk about, presidential greatness, and they rank the presidents, it's always three presidents who are at the top. There's always Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and FDR. Sometimes they switch orders, but Lincoln's usually top ranked. And they've been doing these polls since the 1940s. And when you ask, why do you rank them this way? It's always because the nation was in crisis, right? There was a fundamental crisis in the nation. So George Washington, it's founding the nation. FDR, it's the Great Depression, World War II. Lincoln, it's Civil War, right? And in that crisis, they led the nation. They brought the nation together. They unified behind these policies, and they were able to move the nation forward and resolve the crisis. And so they always rank the worst presidents as those who didn't do that. So Hoover is always one, right?
Andrew Johnson.
Buchanan.
Yeah.
Buchanan is always another one, right, at the bottom. Right now, Donald Trump is ranked the last worst president in American history. And it's for a similar reason, right? So he doesn't unite the nation, but he doesn't actually try to unite the nation. And that's where I think he will always fail the test of presidential greatness. But at the same time, it's what allows him to win the day every day with communication.
Yeah, and is that the new reality? I mean, in social media and the fragmentation of how we get information, is this the new norm? In other words, in FDR and Reagan won two of the largest landslides in American history. Who knows if we're ever going to see a landslide like that again, where 48 states all go for one president. Is that the new normal? And is this what we're seeing from Donald Trump? Does a Democrat pick this up and say, hey, this worked for him, I'm going to do this too, because in this fragmented media age, this is the way you win?
Yeah, that's such a great observation. This is the fragmented media age. And so that's what I mean by he's a rhetorical genius, in that he has solidified this impenetrable base of support through using these strategies, through polarization specifically. So he'll never get the whole nation behind him, but he'll never lose the people who support him. He's destroying the East Wing right now, right? It's a shocking thing. And you would think that, conservative Americans would look at that and think, oh, that's very bad. I don't think that it will change their mind about him, right? Like, he can explain
I
away.
know we focus primarily on presidential leadership, but are we seeing the same thing in New York City right now with the candidacy of Ami for mayor? Where, granted, you do see a divided opposition in terms of the candidates running for election. But regardless of what the opposition has said or done, his supporters are pretty much his supporters. And they're looking for a change, and they do see that change in him.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting comparison. I will have to see a little bit more about how it plays out.
And actually, if he wins,
if he wins,
expected,
then,
in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I think there's a different way that Democrats have done this, have tried to play into the sort of niche media environment. So we looked at Obama and his presidency, and obviously he had the same media ecosystem that he was working in. And he did make choices about communicating directly with his supporters and with friendly media and his base, going over the heads of Congress and around the news filter to speak directly through text messaging, through Facebook, groups, things where he boxed out the White House press corps and announced things like, I'm giving an immigration speech about this new, immigration policy that I have, and announced it first on social media, before the White House press corps. And so you saw that before, but their social media strategy was to keep it friendly. Right? They wanted to post things that they thought that their supporters would be proud of. And because they were proud of it and it was their president and it was a beautiful photo or it was cute with a little kid or it was whatever, that they would amplify that message, and recirculate it on behalf. So horizontal propaganda strategy. Donald Trump has not done that. He has done the exact opposite. His strategy is outrage bait all the time, just constant outrage. And so it's a very different emotional register that he is tapping into. And it is probably more fitting for his base, to be honest. Democrats are not super in love with feeling outraged all the time. They would much rather feel proud. They would much rather be engaged in a kind of intellectual conversation. People who study, again, political psychology, find that Democrats have a larger need for cognition. They want to think about things and reason through processes. And so you have to sort of give them evidence and persuade, not that they're immune, of course, because none of us are immune to having our amygdalas hijacked through outrage bait and fear appeals and, all of these negative strategies. But I think that at least the way that the right-wing media has evolved over the last couple of decades, people on the right are very used to that. They're sort of addicted to it. They look for it. We're all scanning for threats all the time, but they're like looking to their media to tell them, like, who should I be mad at today? Who's trying to, cheat on me today? And so those messages really resonate because that's what they're primed for.
Dr. Jennifer Murchia, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's so interesting, especially, I think, because of the incredible change we're seeing in how we communicate. This lays right into that, and it'll be really interesting to see if what you say about Democrats and the way they see things, the Democratic Party as it is now, and that's, of course, changed, whether that holds, whether that kind of slightly more intellectual focus can hold in the era of rage bait all the time, 24/7 in social media. Anyway, Texas A&M, and the book is called The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
In 2018, the Supreme Court struck down the 1992 Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which was a federal ban on sports betting in states where gambling had not been previously established. With the Supreme Court's ruling, states can now call the shots, so to speak, on legalized sports betting. And in the first 5 years of legalized sports betting, according to PBS News, Americans wagered more than $220 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars, using legal gambling outlets. The industry is large, but there are reservations about sports betting. According to a Marist Gen Next survey, 15% of Americans think there should be a federal law which makes it illegal to bet on sports everywhere in the United States. 64% reported the states should continue to decide on the legality of sports betting, and 21% thought a federal law should be passed to make sports gambling legal everywhere in the United States. When it comes to a federal law to legalize betting nationwide, younger generations remain more open to the idea. 26% of Gen Z and 27% of millennials support the idea, compared with just 10 to 11% among those in the baby boomer and silent greatest generations. So how prevalent exactly is sports betting? Well, according to a new Pew survey from just this month, 22% of U.S. adults placed a sports bet in the past year, and that's up from 19% in 2022. But Americans are increasingly wary of the trend. 43% now say legalized sports betting is bad for society, and 40% say it's bad for sports. Both are up nearly 10 points since 2022. And only 7% think it's a good thing for society. Now remember, we aren't just talking about in-person sports betting at a casino. Online or app-based sports betting is now prevalent. And according to our Gen Next survey, 56% of Americans overall support or strongly support online or app-based sports gambling. Here too, though, there is a generation gap. 67% of Gen Z and millennials favor online or app-based sports betting, compared with just 36% of baby boomers and 26% of the silent greatest generation. Of course, there are questions about risky behavior and addiction related to sports gambling, but I want to take a pause here about the data. Barb, I want to bring you in. What do you think accounts for these generational differences in reference to sports gambling?
Well, back in the day, if I can take Lee's perspective here, but back in the day, there was certainly a negative perception of betting. It was considered illegal. I mean, I don't know even if this generation has an understanding of talking to your bookie and what that would mean, because that was the person that was underhandedly making bets for you, either at a track or on some kind of an event. And it was illegal to place bets on sporting events, along with a whole number of things. And look, this doesn't even speak to the money that changes hands on betting that is not part of these legalized betting processes and these online apps. If you think about when we do have major events like the Super Bowl, most people are part of some kind of pool as to who is going to win, what the score is going to be. You also see the popularity of prediction markets. So we have become really inundated with this idea of kind of being able to predict the future and kind of put the money where your mouth is or where your opinion is. So I can very much see, just in terms of the changes in the laws, in terms of the openness of betting and the lack of stigma that is now associated with placing a bet on something. I think a whole generation is growing up in a very, very different context.
Yeah, you make a really great point about the stigma, because growing up, that there was always a stigma associated with gambling, whether it be even a pool and being concerned about, oh my goodness, who's seeing my participation in a pool or something along those lines. But I did want to bring Tommy in, because Tommy, you are a member of this generation and the youngest generation. And so with that, do you perceive among your peers this acceptability of sports betting, especially in terms of using apps to place a bet?
I think that social media right now, a lot of like influencers frame it in a way that sports betting is okay and that you should gamble. I've seen videos on my phone. It's like, oh, like I just sold my car so I can go bet on a game or something. It's just like these ridiculous things, and they'll frame it in a way that they win. So it makes it believable to the younger generation that it's possible to win. But that's not really the reality. So I have a few friends, when they turn 21, they all bet $100 on a couple of games, a couple of different parlays and stuff. And within like a week or so, they lost it all. I'm really twisted on if gambling is a good thing or a bad thing right now. I don't know if it's with social media. I don't know if it's possible to win big or if it's just not a reality.
Well, if it's a business, the likelihood businesses are not in the business to lose money. So I think the idea behind gambling is really, quote, the house always wins. So over time, as this becomes more of just a passing and kind of playful activity, there are real dangers to gambling, because the playing field, no pun intended, is not level between those who are placing the bet and those who are, in a sense, insuring it.
Mm-hmm. And Barb, you bring up the risky behaviors. Tommy, you mentioned that your friends lost some money when participating in sports betting. I wanted to bring in some numbers here. According to a 2024 UC San Diego survey, the survey found that there were rising signs of risky or harmful gambling behaviors, such as, betting more than intended, or chasing losses, or experiencing financial or emotional stress. And that included a 23% increase in searches for gambling addiction after the legalization of sports betting and making it more prevalent nationally. Tommy, do you feel as though there's an immunity to the risk, or do you feel as though for your generation, the idea of risk associated with gambling is now becoming more real based on the experiences of your peers?
Yeah, I don't know if it's becoming more real, because a lot of the stuff you see on the internet is false. And I think that a lot of people are getting confused that, it's possible to win these big things. So I think that there definitely should be more awareness about people losing big and the negative effects, because I don't see that anywhere. And growing up, I was always told by my parents, like, to never gamble. They don't gamble at all. And that's kind of the way I grew up. So I guess it's kind of ingrained in my head. But I see it with my peers that, I start to see them gambling, and a lot of them are starting to lose money.
Yeah, Mary, I just also wanted to have you weigh in here too. As these gambling laws have really allowed people to participate in these times of activities, do you get a sense that perhaps some of our cultural attitudes, our cultural values may also be at risk here?
Well, it really depends on how you define those values. I know that's really a vague answer, but I do wonder if it really speaks to more sort of what Tommy is saying, which is the idea of the legalization of sports betting in this environment of such open communication and also perhaps unfiltered and communication where everyone has access to different information based on their own cultural beliefs or cultural levels of acceptability. And I wonder too if the idea of the digital ability to place a bet makes it more acceptable or easier. I mean, Barb, you pointed out the ideas of what would happen if you got caught going to a bookie back in the day. You actually have not that I would know from experience, but you'd make a phone call.
Nor I, but I saw it in the movies.
Exactly. Or you'd have to go somewhere, or you'd take a trip to Vegas, or you'd take a trip to Atlantic City where you could place a bet legally. And so it was a lot harder and a lot riskier in certain aspects to go and place a bet. And now, there's this idea that you could pick up your phone or you could go online and you can place a bet quite easily. And I think back to the idea of when email even was a new form of communication and connection, in the sense that the filter was down. You can quickly send an email and not reread the email. And you might be saying things that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily say in person to somebody. And it opened up Pandora's box because you didn't have that face-to-face communication. You didn't have that filter. And I'm wondering now if this, with digital sports betting, if that's part of it too. It's easier. You don't necessarily feel the risk involved, but yet there are negative consequences that can result in terms of addiction, in terms of financial loss, in terms of strain on family that has always been associated with gambling.
Well, that's an interesting point that you make too. The legal risk has been reduced and mitigated, but the financial risk and perhaps the emotional toll has not. Well, Lee is not here today, but I am going to do my best on today's fun fact. He always teases that I have no sense of humor whatsoever, so perhaps today's fun fact will not be as fun, but I'll give it a try. And the question that our student producers came up with was from a poll done in 1990 by the Gallup News Service. And it was a survey on paranormal phenomena. And the one question that we are looking at today was Gallup at the time did read a list, but they wanted you to tell the pollster whether or not you have ever had each of these types of experiences. And the one we're looking at today is had the feeling of déjà vu and felt you had been somewhere or done something before. I think science characterizes déjà vu as some kind of memory illusion where a person feels that a current experience has already occurred. And it's somehow linked to how our brain processes and retrieves information. But nationally, what we found, or what Gallup found a couple of decades ago, was that a majority, 56% of Americans, said that they could relate to this idea of being someplace before. And 42%, and I thought that was pretty surprising that it was such a large proportion. But how about you guys? I mean, I feel that I certainly have had a sense of déjà vu, particularly when we're midweek and I swear it's still Monday. But how about you guys?
That's déjà vu.
That's just a rough week.
That's just a typical rough week. I'm sure that's the same thing. If that's the case, I have déjà vu almost daily, but that's it.
So Jay, yeah, how about you? Is this something familiar, or is it just something that we kind of characterize anything where we feel we've been here before?
I am as surprised as you are that 42% of the people say they haven't felt this. I just assumed that would be like very close to the 100% poll that you never get, right?
Yeah.
That you can never get at that number. Sure, I mean that's part of, like you said, that's part of the brain is God, this seems so familiar. Like I've seen this before, I've been there, or I've said that before. or I've heard that before. I mean, I don't know how 42% of the people, maybe they didn't understand the question. I don't know. I just find that. Yes.
No judgment,
I
Jay.
have lots of deja vu. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I've had deja vu, but I had it more so when I was younger. I mean, like really strong deja vu, but I would have to stop myself and look around and be like, whoa, I've been here before. I've heard this before. But now certain things just seem a heck of a lot more familiar. Like, yeah, this sort of feels. But yes, 100%. I've had deja vu.
Working with Lee, and his stories, it's deja vu all over again with him and his stories.
Okay,
that was a quote. Yeah, I know.
All right.
That's
All
why I
right.
wanted him in this segment so we could do the Yogi Berra routine. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Mary.
No, Tommy, what about you?
I think for me, it's like being certain places, it feels like you've been there before. One example is when I went to nationals for my senior year of high school. I think I was like visualizing it so much in my head that when I actually got there, it felt like I've actually been there before.
Interesting.
That is interesting because I know a lot of people, especially in sports, say if you visualize it, it can happen. And so I think that's, have we done that? Have we visualized and perhaps seen ourselves in a certain place because we wanted something so much to happen?
Well, what's interesting is there is a theory of science that actually says that deja vu is a sign of a very well-functioning brain and not a memory error. So you may have just given the perfect example to support that theory.
Good job,
How about you, AJ?
Yeah, I get it a lot. I feel like I get it more doing like trivial, like everyday things. And then like more rarely like something really specific that like is kind of like weirds me out because I'm like, I don't know. I think usually I get it probably because it's like just things that are in my routine doing them like really often. And then like sometimes more out there experiences.
I think the takeaway here is the next time you experience deja vu, you should say, you know what, my brain is working really well.
See you next time.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers, Cassie Connors, Sylvia Weiser, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.